James, why did you sell my car without even asking me? I stood in our brightly lit kitchen, gripping the edge of the countertop. James was lounging on the couch, phone in hand, barely looking up as I spoke. Emma, I told you last week. We needed the money, James replied casually. His voice was indifferent, almost bored. The money? For what? My voice was rising, my patience wearing thin. For the new entertainment system. You saw how outdated the old one was. We deserved an upgrade, James said with a shrug, his eyes glued to a video on his phone. That car was important to me, James. It wasn't just about the money. It was mine. My voice cracked, and I took a deep breath, remembering my grandmother's advice to keep my inheritance secret. I never thought I'd need to follow it so strictly. James finally looked up, his expression a mix of irritation and nonchalance. Come on, Emma, it's just a car. We can get you another one later. I shook my head, frustration boiling over. You didn't even bother to ask me. This isn't just about the car, James. It's about respect and consideration. You can't just make decisions like this on your own. Our suburban home, usually a tranquil retreat, now felt stifling and alien. The neighborhood outside was quiet, with children playing in front yards and neighbors chatting over fences. To the outside world, we were just another happy couple in a tight-knit community. But inside, the cracks were growing deeper every day. James finally set his phone down and stood up, walking towards me. Emma, you're overreacting. It's not like we're broke. I'll buy you another car. End of discussion. His dismissive tone cut through me like a knife. I looked at him, searching for the man I'd married, the man who had once been attentive and kind. But all I saw was a stranger, someone who was slowly bleeding me dry of patience and trust. End of discussion? I repeated, incredulous. You can't just dictate how this goes, James. You've crossed a line, and you don't even see it. James's eyes narrowed. What's really going on here, Emma? You've been acting distant for months. Is there something you're not telling me? I took a step back, realization dawning. My grandmother's advice echoed in my mind. Now, more than ever, I understood why she had been so adamant. Protecting my inheritance wasn't about the money itself. It was about keeping control over something that was truly mine, especially when everything else seemed to be slipping away. I don't know, James. Maybe it's because you've stopped caring about what's important to me, I said quietly. Or maybe it's because you think you can just bulldoze through this marriage, making decisions that suit only you. James scoffed, shaking his head. You're being dramatic. I'm just trying to improve our lives. Your life, I corrected. Improving your life at my expense. He didn't respond, just stared at me with a mixture of frustration and confusion. I realized then that he truly didn't see the problem, or maybe he didn't want to. Either way, it was clear that something had to change, and fast. As James turned back to his phone, dismissing the conversation, I felt a surge of determination. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. I wasn't going to be sidelined in my own life. Grandma's wisdom was a guiding light, and it was time I started listening to it more carefully. Tension hung heavily in the air as I walked out of the kitchen, my heart pounding. One thing was certain. I wasn't going to let James's betrayal define me. This was only the beginning, and I had my own plans to make. Claire, I don't know what to do anymore, I said, dropping onto her couch. The floral print cushions smelled faintly of lilac. Claire looked up from her magazine, instantly concerned. Emma, what happened? Did James do something again? I sighed heavily, running my fingers through my hair. He sold my car without even asking me, just traded it for some stupid entertainment system. Claire's eyes widened in shock. Seriously? Who sells someone's car without asking? That's insane. Yes, and he acted like it wasn't a big deal, just brushed it off like I was overreacting. My voice wavered as I recounted the morning's confrontation. He's been doing this for a while now, hasn't he? Claire asked softly. I nodded. It didn't start this way. When we first got together, he was so kind, so attentive. I felt like I was the center of his universe. But now, I let the sentence hang, unfinished. Claire squeezed my hand reassuringly. Have you thought about leaving him? You don't have to stay in a situation like this, Emma. I bit my lip, hesitating. I have, but it's complicated. We've built a life together, and it's not easy to just walk away. Claire's face was etched with concern. You have to do what's best for you. Always remember that. Later that evening, as I cleaned up the dinner dishes James had left behind, I started thinking about the early days of our relationship. I remembered the picnics in the park, the surprise weekend getaways. He used to plan everything so meticulously, making sure every moment was special. But that James was long gone, replaced by someone who seemed to care more about his gadgets and parties than about me. While scrubbing the last of the pots, I noticed the flashy new entertainment system taking up half the living room. I felt a bitter taste in my mouth. I grabbed my phone and started scrolling through James's social media. My heart sank when I saw the photos of his recent parties, extravagant and filled with friends I barely knew. Numerous gadgets cluttered our home, all bought with the money he got from selling my car. I fumed silently, deciding to confront him again when he came home. The door creaked open as James stumbled in, the smell of alcohol clinging to him. "James, where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He laughed drunkenly. "Out with the guys, needed a break, you know?" I took a deep breath. "I saw the photos, all those expensive gadgets and parties. Is that where the money from my car went?" James looked at me, his eyes unfocused. "Come on, Emma. Don't start with this again. It's just stuff. We're having fun." "Fun without considering my feelings?" I snapped. "This is beyond disrespectful, James, that you're ignoring everything I care about." James rolled his eyes, slumping into the couch. "Why don't you ever chill out? You used to be fun." Tears of frustration stung my eyes. "This isn't about fun, James. It's about you taking everything I care about and tossing it aside." He didn't respond, eyes already closing as he passed out on the couch. The sound of his snoring filled the room, but it couldn't drown out the anger and hurt simmering in my chest. I stood there for a moment, looking at the man who once promised to cherish me. Claire's words echoed in my mind. Maybe it was time to make a change, to find the strength Grandma had always believed I had. This betrayal wasn't the end, it was just the beginning of something new, and I was ready to fight for the life I deserved. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table, coffee untouched, phone in hand. I needed to talk to my parents. I dialed my mom's number and waited. "Emma, sweetheart, how are you?" My mom answered, her voice warm and comforting. "Mom, things with James, they're worse than ever," I began, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, honey, what happened?" she asked, her tone immediately concerned. I quickly explained the car situation and James's ongoing disregard for my feelings. "I'm considering divorce, Mom. I can't do this anymore." There was a pause on the line. "Emma, we've always supported you, no matter what. Your father and I will help you through this. And remember, you have your inheritance." "I know, Mom. I might need to use it to move out and start over," I admitted, feeling a small twinge of relief saying it out loud. "We'll support you, darling. Do what you need to do," she assured me. As I ended the call, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. It was time to take action. I started drafting an email to a lawyer, seeking advice on the next steps for divorce and considering apartments in a nearby town. After a few hours, I felt more determined than ever. That evening, I kept my phone close, anticipating a reply from the lawyer. As I sat on the couch, James entered the room, eyes suspicious. "What have you been doing all day?" he asked, his tone accusatory. "Just sorting some things out," I replied, keeping my answers vague. James eyed my phone. "Who were you talking to earlier?" "Mom, I needed some advice," I said, avoiding his gaze. Before I knew it, James snatched my phone from my hand. "What the hell, James? Give it back!" I yelled, lunging after him. He scrolled through my messages, his face darkening. "Thinking about leaving me, huh?" His voice was laced with anger. "Give me my phone, James, now." My voice was firm, even though my heart was pounding. James's eyes flashed dangerously. "You think you can just run away with that little inheritance of yours? Everything should go to us, not just you. You've been hiding it all this time?" My mind raced. "I didn't have to tell you everything. That money was meant to give me security." "You're gonna use it to get away from me?" He spat, stepping closer. I stood my ground. "Yes, James, if that's what it takes. I'm done." He threw the phone on the couch, stepping back, but his expression was still livid. "You won't get far with that money. You owe me, Emma. We're in this together." "We were in this together, James. You're the one who turned it into something else," I said coldly. James stared at me, seething, before storming out of the room, slamming the door behind him. My hands were shaking, but I felt a rush of determination. This couldn't go on any longer. I had my plan. I was going to make it out of this mess one way or another. The email dinged, signaling a new message from the lawyer. I quickly opened it and read through the advice, solidifying my resolve. It was time to take the next step. I packed a small bag with essentials, calling Claire to give her a heads up. She answered on the first ring. "Claire, can I stay with you for a while? I'm leaving tonight." "Emma, of course. Come right over. We'll figure this out together," Claire said, her voice unwavering. Grabbing my bag, I took one last look around the house that had become more a prison than a home. Then I walked out the door and didn't look back. I arrived at Claire's house, still gripping the small suitcase. Claire opened the door before I could knock, pulling me into a tight hug. "You did the right thing, Emma," she whispered. "Thanks, Claire," I replied, stepping inside. We sat down in her living room, the warm ambiance a stark contrast to the cold tension I'd left behind. "So what's the plan?" Claire asked, handing me a cup of tea. "I contacted a lawyer. Tomorrow I'll start looking for a new place and a job. I need to be independent, both emotionally and financially," I explained, taking a sip. Claire nodded. "You know you can stay here as long as you need to. We've got this." The next morning, I woke up early, ready to tackle my to-do list. Claire drove me around town, helping me check out apartments. We found a cozy one-bedroom that felt just right. I put down a deposit and scheduled a move-in date. Later, I sat at Claire's kitchen table, laptop open, applying for jobs. The task was tedious but necessary. It wasn't long before emails and phone calls started coming in. By evening, I had lined up several interviews. As I celebrated these small victories with Claire, my phone rang. It was James. My heart raced, but I answered. "Emma, where are you?" he demanded, his tone aggressive. "That's none of your business," I said, trying to stay calm. "It is my business. We're married. You can't just walk out," he barked. "I had to. You left me no choice," I replied firmly. James scoffed. "You think you're brave now, hiding at Claire's? This is our problem, not hers. Tell me where you are." "I'm not hiding, and it's not just Claire's problem. I'm done being treated like I don't matter," I said, my voice steady. "You owe me, Emma. For the mortgage, the bills, everything. You think you can just run off with your inheritance and leave me to deal with everything?" His desperation was palpable. "This isn't about money, James. It's about respect, or your lack of it," I said, tears filling my eyes. "You'll regret this, Emma," he hissed before hanging up. I put the phone down, my hands shaking. Claire looked at me, concern etched on her face. "He won't stop, will he?" she said softly. "Not easily," I admitted, steeling myself. The next few days flew by in a blur of apartment preparations and job interviews. I felt stronger each day, my resolve hardening. One evening, while I was organizing my new apartment, my phone buzzed again. It was a message from James. "You're making a huge mistake. You'll come crawling back. They always do." I stared at the screen, feeling a mix of anger and sadness. I typed back quickly. "No, James, I'm done crawling. This is my life now." I hit send and blocked his number. Standing by the window, I watched the sun setting over my new neighborhood, feeling a sense of freedom. The next morning, I went to my first job interview. Walking into the office, I was greeted by a friendly receptionist who led me through the process. The interview went well, and I left feeling hopeful. Returning to my new apartment, I found Claire waiting with a bottle of wine and 2 glasses. "To new beginnings," she toasted, handing me a glass. "To new beginnings," I echoed, clinking glasses. As we sat and talked, I realized I was beginning to reclaim my life. Each step forward was a step away from James and his toxic influence. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about all I'd left behind and everything that lay ahead. It wouldn't be easy, but I was ready. For the first time in a long time, I felt in control. A week later, I got the call offering me the job. I smiled, tears of joy streaming down my face. It was a sign that I was on the right path. I was building a new life, one step at a time, and it was a life where I mattered. The town's annual fair was in full swing. Kids sprinted between booths, their laughter mingling with the cheerful hum of the crowd. I was helping Claire set up her jewelry stall when I felt a tap on my shoulder. "Emma," Jack's familiar voice greeted me. He was a mutual friend, someone dependable who'd always been kind. "Oh, hey, Jack, how's it going?" I asked, forcing a smile. "Pretty good. But hey, I heard about you and James. Are you okay?" Jack's concern was evident. I sighed. It's been rough, but I'm getting through it. Jack nodded, but his face turned cautious. Speaking of James, he's here. And, well, he isn't handling things well. Before I could ask what he meant, a loud commotion drew our attention. James was in the middle of the fairground, visibly intoxicated, shouting at a group of young men gathered around a barbecue pit. "Oh no," I whispered, feeling my stomach knot. "Hey, it's none of your business!" James yelled, pushing one of the men. The crowd's murmur grew louder, eyes turning toward the spectacle. I took a deep breath. I need to handle this. "Emma, are you sure?" Claire asked, worry etched on her face. "I have to," I replied, squaring my shoulders and weaving through the crowd. As I approached, James spotted me and stumbled over. "Emma, there you are. Thought you could avoid me forever?" He slurred, his breath reeking of alcohol. "James, you're making a scene. Let's talk somewhere else," I urged, trying to stay calm. He laughed bitterly. "Why? So you can walk out again? You think you're so much better now?" "James, you're drunk. This isn't the place," I said firmly. "Everyone should know how you abandoned your husband," James shouted, his voice carrying over the crowd. I could feel the eyes of the townsfolk on us, the whispers spreading like wildfire. Anger and embarrassment churned inside me, but I wouldn't let him drag me back down. "James, we're done. You need to accept that," I said, my voice steady. "Now please, go home before you make this worse." "Worse? You think this can get worse?" His eyes were wild, unhinged. "You owe me, Emma. You can't just walk away without paying your dues." "I don't owe you anything, James. I'm done being your pawn," I replied, stepping back as he moved closer. A friend intervened, grabbing James by the arm. "Come on, man. Let's get you out of here." James struggled, but was eventually pulled away, his furious eyes locked on mine. "You're going to regret this, Emma." As he was dragged off, I exhaled a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Claire appeared by my side, her hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" she asked gently. "Yes, it had to be done," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. We continued setting up the stall, the mood around us slowly returning to normal. But I noticed several sympathetic looks from people who'd witnessed the altercation. Hours passed and the fair wore on, becoming a blur of faces and activities. That evening, after packing up, I drove to my new apartment. Walking in, I felt a mix of exhaustion and relief. I was finally free of James's constant manipulation, even if the road ahead was still uncertain. I spent the next few days settling in, gradually feeling the weight lift off my shoulders. One morning, I walked over to the mirror in my new bedroom and caught my reflection. There was a spark in my eyes, one that had been missing for a long time. This was my life, my space, and my chance to rebuild. The memory of James's public meltdown was still fresh, but it only fueled my resolve. I was moving forward, and nothing he did would pull me back. Stepping out into the crisp morning air, I felt a newfound sense of purpose. Today was just another step, and step by step I was reclaiming my future. One morning, a week after the fair, I was getting ready for my first day at the new job when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Jack. "Emma, can we meet up? There's something you need to know about James." My curiosity piqued. I agreed to meet him at the local coffee shop after work. The day passed quickly, filled with training and meeting new colleagues. By evening, I felt both exhausted and exhilarated. At the coffee shop, Jack was already waiting with 2 drinks. He waved me over, his expression serious. "Thanks for coming, Emma," he said, sliding one of the cups over to me. "No problem, Jack. What's going on?" I asked, taking a sip. Jack took a deep breath. "James lost his job, the company downsized, and he was let go." I blinked in surprise. "I didn't know that. He hasn't contacted me since the fair." "Yeah, he's not taking it well," Jack continued. "He's been telling people you left him at the worst possible time, trying to play the victim, but there's more." I leaned in, my heart racing. "What do you mean?" "He's planning something, Emma. He told a mutual friend he's going to try to win you back so he can get his hands on your inheritance." Anger flared inside me. "He really thinks he can manipulate me again?" Jack nodded. "He's desperate, Emma. You need to be careful." "Thanks for the warning, Jack. I'll stay vigilant," I said, my resolve hardening. As I walked back to my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread. James losing his job changed things, making him more unpredictable. I unlocked my apartment door and stepped inside, my mind racing. I needed to be prepared for whatever scheme he cooked up. The next few days were a whirlwind of work and settling into my new routine. One evening, as I was organizing my closet, there was a knock at the door. I hesitated, peering through the peephole. It was James. "Emma, open up. We need to talk," he called, his voice shaky. Taking a deep breath, I opened the door slightly, leaving the chain on. "What do you want, James?" He looked disheveled, clearly stressed. "Emma, I'm sorry for everything. I've lost my job. I need your help." "You need my help," I repeated, incredulous. "After everything you've done?" "Please, Emma, we can work this out. Think about what we had," he pleaded, trying to sound genuine. "What we had, James, is over. You made sure of that," I replied firmly. His demeanor shifted, his eyes flashing with anger. "You can't leave me like this. You owe me." "I owe you nothing," I said, slamming the door shut and locking it. I could hear James banging on the door, shouting, but I leaned against it, breathing deeply. After a few minutes, the banging stopped, and I heard him leave. I checked the peephole to make sure he was gone before calling Claire. "Emma, what's wrong?" she asked, hearing the panic in my voice. James showed up at my apartment. "He's acting desperate and unhinged," I explained. "Stay calm, Emma. You need to protect yourself." "Consider getting a restraining order," Claire suggested. "I'll look into it." "Thanks, Claire," I said, feeling a bit more anchored after talking to her. The next morning, I called the lawyer to discuss my options. He advised me to document everything and start the process for a restraining order. I followed his advice, keeping a log of every interaction with James. Days turned into weeks, and I focused on building my new life. One afternoon, while taking a break at work, I saw a familiar face across the street. It was James, watching me. My heart pounded, but I straightened my shoulders and continued with my day. This was my life now, my chance to be free. No matter how desperate James became, I wasn't going back. This was about reclaiming my future, and I was determined not to let him take that away from me. The moment I stepped out of my building, I saw James sitting on a bench across the street. His eyes locked onto mine, and he stood up, walking towards me. "You've got to be kidding me," I muttered under my breath. I quickened my pace, determined not to engage with him, but he caught up to me before I could reach the corner. "Emma, wait," James called out, reaching for my arm. I yanked my arm away, anger flaring. "What do you want, James? I've told you it's over." "Just hear me out," he pleaded, desperation clear in his voice. "I've been trying to get back on my feet, but it's been hard without you. We can make this work again." I stared at him, incredulous. "You really think I'd come back after everything? You manipulated, lied, and used me. There's nothing left to fix." James looked around, a flicker of anger passing over his face. "We were married, Emma. That means working through the tough times." "I did work through the tough times, James, alone, while you partied and spent money you didn't have," I shot back, feeling a rush of righteous indignation. A passerby slowed down, eyes widening at the commotion, but I stood my ground. The whole world might as well know what I've been through. James's posture shifted from pleading to confrontational. "You want people to think I'm the bad guy? You've been hiding money, living this new life while I'm struggling." "Living this new life isn't easy, but it's necessary," I said, trying to keep calm. "I need peace, James, something you can't seem to offer." His eyes darkened. "You think you're better than me now?" "No, James. I think I deserve better than how you treated me," I replied, turning to walk away. James grabbed my shoulder, spinning me around. "This isn't over, Emma. You're not getting rid of me that easily." "Get your hands off me," I yelled, drawing the attention of more bystanders. James's grip loosened, but the venom in his eyes remained. A tall man in a suit stepped forward. "Is everything all right here?" he asked, eyeing James warily. "Yes, thank you," I answered quickly. "I was just leaving." James glared at the man, but took a step back. "This isn't over," he repeated, his voice low and threatening. Ignoring his parting words, I hurried away, my heart pounding. This encounter couldn't scare me into submission. It only made me more resolute. Back at my apartment, I immediately called my lawyer. "James is stalking me. I need to escalate this. What are my options?" "We can file for a restraining order immediately," he replied. "Document today's incident in detail and we'll proceed." Hours later, while I completed the necessary paperwork, a sense of empowerment washed over me. Finally, action was being taken to protect my newfound peace. The next week passed without incident until I received a call from an unknown number. My heart sank when I heard his voice again. "Emma, you think a piece of paper will keep me away? You have no idea what I'm capable of," James hissed before the line went dead. Trembling with a mix of fear and fury, I called the police and reported the threat, adding it to the growing case against him. This pattern of intimidation and control would end here. A day later, Claire called me with surprising news. "Emma, people are talking. They know about James's behavior. He's losing friends and support left and right." "Good," I said, feeling a sense of vindication. "He's finally getting what he deserves." As I hung up, I felt an unexpected wave of relief. James's grip on my life was weakening. The community was seeing his true colors, just as I had. I stood by the window, looking out at the bustling evening street below. My journey towards freedom was far from over, but for the first time in a long while, I felt hope. James's fall from grace had begun, and I was reclaiming my future one step at a time. Weeks had passed, and life was slowly returning to a semblance of normal. I was flourishing at my new job, finding satisfaction in the work and camaraderie with my colleagues. Evenings were filled with laughter and support from Claire, who had become my rock. One afternoon I was engrossed in crafting a presentation when my phone buzzed. It was from Jack. "Hey, Emma, are you free to meet for coffee later? Something you should know." My curiosity piqued, I agreed. We met at the little cafe by my office. Jack was already there, looking concerned. "Emma, thanks for meeting me," he greeted, gesturing to the seat across from him. "No problem, Jack. What's going on?" I asked, sitting down. "It's about James. He's not doing well. He's been trying to get people to turn against you, but it's backfiring. People see him for what he is now," Jack explained. Relief washed over me. Good, he needs to face the consequences. But there's more. James got into some trouble with the law. Drunk driving. He's lost even more support, Jack continued. I nodded, feeling a mixture of satisfaction and pity. "Thanks for telling me, Jack. I needed to hear that." After our coffee, I decided to take a walk through the park. The cool breeze and the rustling of leaves felt liberating. It was here I bumped into James, looking disheveled and defeated. He didn't see me at first, but when he did, his eyes darkened. "Well, look who it is," he said, his voice dripping with bitterness. "James, please. I don't want any trouble," I replied, keeping my distance. "You've ruined everything for me, Emma. You and your lies," he spat, his face contorting with anger. "Lies, James? The only person who ruined your life is you. Your actions have consequences," I retorted. He took a shaky step closer. "Consequences? I've lost everything. My respect, friends, all because of you." I stood my ground. "No, James, it's because of your choices. I simply refuse to be your victim anymore." His expression wavered, a flicker of desperation in his eyes. "You think you're free of me? This isn't over." Before he could say anything more, 2 police officers approached. "Mr. Miller?" one of them asked. James turned, his bravado melting away. "Yes?" "You're under arrest for violating the restraining order. You were warned to stay away from Ms. Miller," the officer said, pulling out handcuffs. James's face turned pale. "Emma, you can stop this. Tell them it's a mistake," he pleaded, panic in his voice. I shook my head. "No, James, this ends now." The officers led him away, and I stood there, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. It was truly over. Returning to my apartment that evening, I found a letter in the mail. Opening it, I discovered I had been approved for a higher position at work, a promotion. It felt like the universe was giving me a sign that I was on the right path. I called Claire to share the good news, and she was ecstatic. We celebrated with a small dinner at my place, toasting to new beginnings and the end of a dark chapter. That night, I took a moment to reflect on my journey. From the betrayal that shattered my world to the steps I took to rebuild it. I had found strength I didn't know I possessed and had reclaimed my life piece by piece. Walking through the bustling streets the next day, I felt lighter. The weight of past traumas was lifting, replaced by a sense of empowerment and hope. I deserved this new life. A life where my worth was not dictated by someone else's whims. As I turned a corner, I caught a glimpse of someone familiar. James, disheveled and on the edge, standing outside a convenience store, clearly struggling. Our eyes briefly met, but there was no connection left. I walked on, a silent resolve in my heart. James's downfall was complete. My future, bright and full of possibilities, was just beginning. and I was ready to embrace it, one step at a time. I stared at Tom's back as he walked away, his sister Nancy trailing behind him like an obedient lapdog. "Maggie, taking care of your mother-in-law is your job while we're gone. Don't mess it up," he tossed over his shoulder without even a glance in my direction. As the front door slammed shut, I let out a long breath, my shoulders sagging. 4 weeks alone with Caroline, Tom's bedridden, mute mother. The same woman who had treated me with thinly veiled disdain from the moment I'd married her son 5 years ago. I trudged up the stairs to Caroline's room, dreading the next month. She lay motionless on the bed, her pale, wrinkled face expressionless as always. "Well, Caroline, looks like it's just you and me," I muttered, receiving no response. The first week passed in a blur of monotony. I fed Caroline, bathed her, changed her bedding, all while she stared blankly ahead, never uttering a sound. The silence was deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old house settling. On the 8th day, something shifted. As I leaned over to adjust Caroline's pillows, her bony hand shot out, gripping my wrist with surprising strength. I gasped, meeting her piercing blue eyes for the first time. "Enough of this charade, Maggie," she rasped, her voice rough from disuse. "We have work to do." I could only gape at her, my mind reeling. Caroline pushed herself upright, swinging her legs over the edge of the bed. "But how? You've been—" "Pretending," she finished, a wry smile tugging at her lips, playing the helpless old woman to avoid dealing with my wretched family. As she began to explain, revealing a web of deceit and cruelty I'd never imagined, a fierce determination took root within me. Tom's betrayal ran deeper than I'd ever known, but now with Caroline's help, I would unravel every last secret. The game was on. As Caroline's revelations sank in, a wave of emotions crashed over me. Shock, anger, betrayal. I had always known Tom's family was a little off, but this was a whole new level of depravity. "How could you let them treat you like that?" I demanded, my voice shaking with fury. "You're their mother, their own flesh and blood." Caroline's expression hardened. At first, I tried to fight back, but they slowly stripped me of everything. My money, my power, even my dignity. By the time I realized the truth, it was too late. Her eyes bored into mine, icy and resolute. "That's why we have to stop them, Maggie, before they do the same to you." A shiver ran down my spine at her ominous words. Was that Tom's plan all along? To isolate me, make me dependent on him and his vile family? The thought made me sick. "Start from the beginning," I urged Caroline. "I need to know everything." And so she told me a sordid tale of greed, manipulation, and outright cruelty that made my blood boil. How her late husband's inheritance had sparked a vicious power struggle within the family. How Tom and Nancy had slowly turned against her, stripping her assets and forcing her into a life of subservience, all under the guise of caring for their poor, helpless mother. By the time Caroline finished, hot tears of rage stung my eyes. "Those bastards," I spat, "using their own mother like that." A gnarled hand gripped mine, startling me. "That's why we have to fight back," Caroline stated, her voice laced with steel. "They won't see it coming." A plan began to form, pieces slotting into place like a twisted puzzle. We would follow Tom and his wretched family to Maui, catch them in the act of whatever new scheme they were hatching. And when we did, justice would be ours. Over the next few days, Caroline and I hatched our plan. She knew someone who could help us, an old friend named Mark who used to work as a private investigator. "Are you sure we can trust him?" I asked warily as Caroline dialed the number. She shot me a reassuring look. "Mark's one of the few decent people left in this world. He'll help us bring those snakes down." The phone call was brief, but by the time Caroline hung up, a sly grin had crept across her weathered features. "He's in. Said he's been itching for some juicy drama to sink his teeth into." A surprising burst of laughter escaped my lips. Who would have thought sweet demure Maggie Owens would be plotting an elaborate revenge scheme? If Tom could see me now— The thought of my treacherous husband sobered me instantly. Caroline must have noticed my change in demeanor, because she reached out and gave my hand a comforting squeeze. "I know it hurts, dear. Believe me, I understand the pain of having your own family betray you." Her eyes hardened. "But that's exactly why we have to do this, to show them we're not just a couple of helpless old ladies to be manipulated and cast aside." Her words lit a fire in my belly. She was right. For too long, I had meekly accepted the crumbs Tom and his vicious brood deigned to toss my way. But not anymore. This time, we would be the ones calling the shots. Mark arrived 2 days later, a rumpled but kind-looking man in his 40s. As Caroline introduced us, I studied him carefully, looking for any signs of dishonesty or ulterior motives, but his warm brown eyes crinkled with genuine compassion as he shook my hand. "Don't you worry, Maggie," he said in a gentle southern drawl. "We're going to nail those lying snakes, but good." And so we got to work, poring over flight manifests and hotel reservations, mapping out every step of Tom's upcoming trip to Maui. With each detail we uncovered, my resolve solidified like steel. Finally, the day arrived. As I stood in the kitchen watching the black Suburban pull away, Tom's stupid smug face visible through the tinted windows, I felt a surge of vicious satisfaction. Let him enjoy this little vacation. It would be his last taste of freedom before everything came crashing down around him. I turned to find Caroline and Mark watching me, twin expressions of grim determination etched on their faces. Time to go hunting. With Tom and his family now en route to Maui, the real work began. Mark sprang into action, a whirlwind of phone calls and computer searches as he dug up every scrap of intel on their targets. "This Tom fella sure loves his luxury resorts," he muttered, scribbling notes on a legal pad. "But we can use that against him." Caroline and I huddled close, watching with bated breath as Mark cross-referenced hotel listings and flight schedules. Finally, he circled something with a triumphant flourish. "Got it! They're staying at the Grand Wailea Resort. Pricey place, but that means more staff to bribe for information." He shot us a conspiratorial wink. A sly grin tugged at Caroline's lips. "Excellent work, Mark. Now about getting us over there discreetly." By the time Tom's sniveling voice crackled over the answering machine with some half-baked excuse about needing to extend their stay, we were ready. Fake identities, meticulously forged documents, Mark had covered every base with the same care as a master artist crafting his next masterpiece. The morning we left, I stood in the driveway, squinting against the harsh Arizona sun as I drank in the sight of my quaint little house. Once upon a time, it had represented everything I'd ever wanted: a loving home, a caring husband, maybe even children someday. Now it was just another empty facade, a monument to the lies my life had become. Tossing my suitcase into the trunk with a decisive thunk, I slid into the back seat beside Caroline. Her face was set in stony determination, any traces of frailty or fear utterly banished. This was a woman who had stared into the depths of betrayal and emerged emboldened, ready to face any challenge head-on. As Mark peeled out of the driveway, I twisted in my seat for one last glimpse of the house rapidly disappearing behind us. A strange sense of finality washed over me, as if I were shedding an old, tarnished skin and being reborn into something new, something stronger, uncompromising, unafraid. This time, there would be no more lies, no more hiding in the shadows while others schemed and plotted in the light. This time, the snakes would get their just desserts. Maui was every bit as beautiful as the glossy travel brochures promised. Sun-drenched beaches, swaying palms, and crystal-clear waters that seemed to beckon weary souls. Too bad we weren't there for a vacation. Mark had booked us a modest room at a different resort, far enough away to avoid any accidental run-ins with Tom's crew. Not that they'd recognize us anyway, thanks to his meticulously crafted fake identities. "First order of business," he said, tossing a stack of crisp bills on the rickety table, "is getting eyes and ears inside the Grand Wailea." Caroline's eyes glinted with determination. "Leave that to me, dear. I have a few tricks left up my sleeve." True to her word, within 48 hours, she'd made some very lucrative friends among the resort staff. A maid, a bartender, even the concierge. All it took was flashing a little cash, and they were more than happy to keep their eyes peeled for any suspicious behavior from the Owens family. The first report came 3 days later, delivered in a hushed voice over burner phones like we were deep undercover spies. Becca, the maid, had spotted Tom getting awfully cozy with a pretty young blonde by the adult pool, hand-holding, whispered endearments, the works. White-hot rage lanced through me at the mental image. So not only was the bastard cheating, he was bold enough to do it right under his family's noses? I fought the urge to hurl the phone across the room as Caroline flashed me a sympathetic look. "There's more." Becca continued in a trembling voice. I overheard Nancy and that trollop Becca talking about some kind of plan to cut you out, Maggie. Make it look like you just up and left Tom high and dry so they could take the house. The room seemed to spin around me as the weight of her words sank in. So that's what this whole sick charade had been about, robbing me of everything I had left, leaving me destitute and alone. Tears of fury stung my eyes as Caroline reached out to grip my arm, steadying me. "Breathe. Maggie," she murmured. "We've got them right where we want them." Taking a shuddering breath, I forced myself to nod. Caroline was right. Panicking now would only play right into their hands. We had to stay focused, gather every last shred of evidence to crush them utterly. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Sordid details of Tom's affair, overheard conversations about their insidious plot to steal my home and inheritance. With each new revelation, the white-hot anger burning in my chest flared brighter, becoming an inferno of righteous indignation that threatened to consume me. Finally, the night before we were scheduled to strike, Mark gathered us around the cheap motel table with a grim look. "We've got everything we need to bury those snakes," he stated, his deep voice laced with conviction. "Photos, recordings, the whole 9 yards. They won't be able to talk their way out of this one." Caroline reached across the table, grasping my hand in a vice-like grip. "Are you ready, dear? Once we start down this road, there's no turning back." Meeting her blazing gaze, I felt something shift deep inside, a sense of unshakable purpose, of being in the dead calm eye of the storm before all hell broke loose. This was it, the moment everything changed. "Let's do this," I said, the words ringing with a cold finality. Tomorrow, the Owens family would reap what they'd sown, and this time, I'd be the one dealing the blows. The next evening, showtime arrived. Mark had managed to score us a reservation at Ferraro's, one of the ritziest restaurants at the Grand Wailea, the perfect place to spring our trap. As the valet whisked our rental car away, I smoothed my hands over the slinky black dress Caroline had insisted I wear. "You want them squirming, dear," she'd said with a wicked glint in her eye. "Give them something to look at." The maitre d' led us through the opulent dining room, weaving between tables filled with vacationing millionaires obliviously enjoying their overpriced meals. My heart was pounding a staccato rhythm in my chest as we approached our destination, a semi-secluded alcove near the back, perfectly positioned for our little encounter. They were already there. Tom, resplendent in a tailored linen suit that probably cost more than my car. Nancy, draped in gaudy jewels befitting a faded aristocrat. And beside them, the pretty young blonde I recognized from the photos, Becca, Tom's latest conquest. I felt Caroline tense beside me as we approached, no doubt fighting the urge to rush forward and unleash decades of pent-up fury. Mark's reassuring hand on my elbow was the only thing keeping me grounded. Tom was the first to notice us, his brow furrowing in confusion that quickly morphed into ill-concealed panic. "And Maggie? What are you doing here?" Well, if it isn't the happy family," I drawled, surprised by the biting sarcasm dripping from my words. "Enjoying your vacation, Tom?" He opened and closed his mouth like a gasping fish, shooting panicked glances between me and the oblivious Becca. Nancy, never one to be upstaged, puffed out her bony chest in a pitiful attempt at bravado. "And just what is the meaning of this, Maggie?" she snapped, lips curling into a condescending sneer. "Barging in on our family holiday, putting on such a shameful display. Can it, Nancy?" The words sliced through her tirade like a hot knife through butter. We both know this is no family vacation. With a deft flick of my wrist, I spread the damning photos across the crisp linen tablecloth. Tom draped all over Becca by the pool, whispering into her ear, his face drained of color as his mistress's pretty features contorted in shock and revulsion. You've been watching us?" he choked out, hands trembling. A cruel smile twisted my lips. "Among other things, care to explain to your little friend here about your plan to steal my home, my inheritance?" Becca's head whipped around, eyes wide with a mixture of horror and bewildered hurt. "Tom, what is she talking about?" The question seemed to catalyze something within him. Suddenly he was on his feet, fists clenched, a vein pulsing angrily in his forehead. "You stupid little he snarled, seemingly forgetting we were surrounded by gawking onlookers. That's when Caroline made her move. With a spryness that belied her age, she shot out of her seat and seized him by the lapels, slamming him back into his chair with a surprising burst of strength. "Not another word out of you," she hissed, her face a mask of pure venom as she loomed over her cowering son. "You've tormented me for the last time." Tom's eyes bulged in shock and terror as he finally registered the woman restraining him, the same helpless old crone he'd been belittling and demeaning for years. "Mom? But how?" The sickly sweet smile she turned on him then was somehow more chilling than any glare. "What's the matter, Tommy? You look like you've seen a ghost." The shocked silence that fell over our secluded alcove was deafening. Tom stared up at his mother in abject horror, as if she'd grown a second head right before his eyes. Nancy looked equally stunned, her bravado evaporating like smoke. "But you were bedridden," Tom finally sputtered, grasping at straws. "We took care of you, Mother, after Dad died and left everything in shambles." "Don't you dare play the victim with me, Thomas Owens." Caroline spat, her frail body practically vibrating with pent-up rage. "Not after what you and your wretched sister did to me." Her piercing gaze swung to Nancy, who shrank back in her chair. "Stripping me of my assets, my dignity, my very identity, all for that blasted inheritance. Did you really think I wouldn't eventually catch on to your game?" It was like a dam had burst. Years of deception, manipulation, and suffering came pouring out in a torrent of recriminations. Caroline laid it all bare. The vicious power struggle that erupted after her husband's death, the slow erosion of her autonomy at the hands of her own children, the utter disregard they'd shown her as a human being. "We did what was best for the family," Nancy attempted feebly, but her protests were swiftly silenced by a withering glare. "Best for the family?" Caroline laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Or best for your own greed? I may be old, but I'm not senile. I know exactly what you two vipers were planning here in Maui." She jerked her chin toward the still scattered photos, Tom and Becca's indiscretions laid bare for all to see, using this little tramp to cuckold Maggie, make her look unhinged so you could steal her home out from under her, just like you did to me. Becca made a small, pained noise in the back of her throat, tears welling in her wide eyes. Tom reached out a placating hand, but she flinched away, revulsion etched across her delicate features. Is that true?" She turned to me, anguish and betrayal writ large. "Were you just using me to take everything from your wife?" The lost, broken look on Tom's face would have almost been comical if the situation weren't so twisted. His mouth worked soundlessly as he floundered for an excuse, any lie to salvage what was left of his pathetic charade. In the end, he simply slumped back in his chair, a puppet with its strings cut, defeated. Nancy, however, wasn't quite ready to surrender. Rounding on me with bared teeth, she hissed, "You little bitch! After everything we've done for you, putting a roof over your head, clothes on your back." "That's enough." The words sliced through Nancy's vitriol like a blade, cold and utterly devoid of mercy. Straightening to my full height, I met her hateful glare with an icy one of my own. "Your lies and manipulations end here," I stated, each word ringing with finality. "The Maggie you knew, the sweet, naive little doormat, is gone. Don't like it?" I gestured to the surrounding diners, gawking in scandalized fascination. "Too bad. The whole world can see you for what you really are now." A muscle twitched in Nancy's jaw, but she seemed to realize the futility of arguing. Slowly, almost grudgingly, she sank back into her seat in sullen defeat. As I surveyed the shattered remains of the Owens clan, a strange sense of lightness washed over me, as if a crushing weight had finally been lifted from my shoulders after all this time. The anger, the hurt, the years of rage and resentment, it all seemed to melt away in that moment, leaving only a hollow sort of pity in its wake. These were just sad, small people obsessed with wealth and status, to the point of self-destruction. By trying to control me, they'd ultimately lost everything, their money, their standing, even each other. And in the end, their defeat was entirely of their own making. The flight back from Maui was a blur. Caroline and I huddled together in the emergency exit row, sipping tiny bottles of bourbon and relishing the silence. For once, there were no snakes waiting to strike from the shadows, just the promise of a new beginning. Mark had already made arrangements to handle the legal ramifications of Tom's exposed misdeeds. With his connections and the wealth of evidence we'd gathered, he assured us that the appropriate authorities would be brought into the loop to address any potential criminal charges. As for me, I simply didn't have the energy to even think about pressing charges or going through a lengthy legal battle. I just wanted to move on. The first thing I did when we returned to Arizona was put the house on the market. It didn't take long to find a buyer. Tom's family had done me the favor of selecting a home in a prime neighborhood. As I signed the final paperwork that transferred ownership, I felt an unexpected pang of sadness watching the new owner's excited expressions. Try not to make the same mistakes I did, I couldn't help but murmur as I handed over the keys. With the house settled, it was time to decide my next steps. Caroline and I spent an evening camped out at a local diner, poring over maps and apartment listings as we tried to figure out our new path. "I was thinking somewhere new," she said, tracing her finger over the map. "A fresh start, away from all these bad memories." I nodded slowly. As much as I'd once loved the idea of settling down in the suburbs, raising a family of my own, that dream felt tainted now, irrevocably tarnished by Tom's betrayal and the upheaval that followed. Maybe it was for the best to leave it all behind, to forge ahead into the unknown. "I'm open to it," I agreed. "Any preferences?" Caroline's eyes took on a distant look as she studied the map. "You know, I've always wanted to see New England in the fall. The changing leaves, the crisp air." She let out a contented sigh. "It seems like it would be a lovely place to plant some new roots." I couldn't help but smile at the image she painted, the two of us surrounded by vibrant autumn splendor, finally at peace after the turmoil we'd endured. A chance to reinvent ourselves in a place where the Owens name meant nothing. New England it is, then. In the weeks that followed, we began making preparations for our new life, selling or donating what little we had left in Arizona, researching potential towns and job prospects in the Northeast. With each day that passed, it became easier to shed the weight of the past and look ahead with a sense of renewal. On the morning we were set to depart, I took one last walk through the empty house. Upstairs, I peeked into the room that had once been mine and Caroline's command center. It's covered in maps and photographs detailing every minute of our revenge plot. So much had happened within these walls, so much hurt and anger, yes, but also a reckoning long overdue. A bittersweet smile tugged at my lips as I turned away. The past was the past, the slithering shadows forever banished. Whatever lay ahead in New England was still a mystery, but this time I vowed to march forward with open eyes and a fearless heart. After all, we had already faced down the worst the Owens family could throw at us. From here, the path could only lead forward. As I made my way down the stairs one final time, I felt lighter than I had in years, free of the burdens that once weighed me down. Out in the hallway, Caroline was waiting with an expectant look. "Ready, dear?" she asked, a warm, conspiratorial smile curving her lips. Returning her smile, I gave a decisive nod. We had made it through the shadows. Now it was time to embrace the light.